started this podcast to help people who want to change financial services learn from those who already have. And today's guest has done exactly that. Alex Craddock has been the global CMO at the world's largest asset managers, including iShares, BlackRock, and now Citi. At iShares, he repositioned the brand to capture the rapidly growing demand from retail investors and grew assets by almost $2 trillion in 3 years. And it all started with understanding exactly who the modern investor is.
We started to hear lots of interesting things along the lines of the traditional brands in investing are not brands for me. They don't feel approachable. They don't feel accessible. How they speak to me seems to be in more, investment speak than real language. And I think when you start to get some of those insights back, it really starts to force you to think very differently about, what your brand actually stands for, but importantly, how you actually go to market.
His track record speaks for itself. And we sat down to talk about what really makes a great CMO, his proudest achievements in marketing, and how he drove that success. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Alex. Hi, Alex. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Max. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. I've been really looking forward to this chat for a while now. And as I was just saying, hopefully this isn't overly complimentary, but the whole reason we started this podcast was for marketers in financial services to learn from some of the best. And on paper, it's actually quite hard to argue against you being one of the best, if not the best, right now in the business. So just to recap, you've held CMO roles at Hewlett-Packard, Visa, iShares, BlackRock. Now you've just taken on the coveted Citi CMO role too. And as I was doing this research and digging more, and I've been following your career for years now, when you're there, each of these companies seem to thrive, not just on the brand metrics, but the business metrics. So you literally seem to have the Midas touch. For example, we were just talking about re-establishing Hewlett-Packard as the number one PC brand in the world. When you returned to iShares, asset grew from a mind-boggling $1.8 trillion to $3.5 trillion when you left. So I wanted to start with a very simple question. What do you think the role is of a CMO, and what makes a great one?
Well, hey, Max, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. And thank you for that very glowing introduction. I think there's causation and correlation probably a little bit in all of that, but I love it anyway. So look, I think the CMO role is an interesting role at the moment because I think if you were to ask some CMOs, they'd probably say, look, it's been under attack. I think there are some big brands that have actually eliminated the CMO role as a title over the last few years. UPS, Etsy, Walgreens were a few that definitely got into the press. But I think what's interesting is the CMO role hasn't gone away. I think it's maybe evolving in terms of titles. It's getting sucked into things like Chief Commercial or Chief Client Officer, or in my case, I'm now Chief Marketing and Content Officer, so even my title's evolved. But the responsibilities remain honestly the same, and arguably I think over the last 10, 15 years have moved massively from where they were traditionally for when it was just sort of like marketing and advertising in pursuit arguably of brand preference and acquisition, to now being a really broad, complex role that embraces data, technology, customer experience, all in pursuit of business growth, which you very kindly referred to in the intro, but also customer lifetime value. So I think there's just been this sort of massive shift with regards how the CMO role is perceived from being what I call the craft of marketing. It's not just about turning out great ads. It's actually now about the business of marketing. And I think it's probably one of the most complex roles in the C-suite. And I think, CMOs today, whatever their title might be, I think have to start to think like general managers. I think really have to start to think about how they transition into that role so they as individuals don't get left behind. So I think it's a fascinating time for the CMO, but I think also probably one of the most exciting times to be a CMO.
So in that C-suite, what do you think the CMO is responsible for, and what do you think they're not responsible for?
I think they're responsible for certainly, data technology. I think they're responsible for the customer experience that you drive through the use of that data and technology. There is, of course, brand and reputation, incredibly important. And at the end of the day, a brand only exists in the pursuit of better commercial outcomes. And I think, it's no surprise businesses that have have done well, have great brands. And I remember that being one of my conversations when they were hiring me at BlackRock to take on the iShares CMO role. It was like, we want to build a great business. And as I look around the world, great businesses have great brands. So can you build us one of those? So I think people still see that direct connection to a great brand and a great reputation and the business outcome. But I think importantly, there's also new aspects like you've got to be driving innovation. I think we're living in a time right now where AI, Gen AI in particular, is starting to really become an important topic. I think we as a CMO have a massive responsibility to think about how we drive that, not just in the pursuit of better client experiences, maybe more efficient workflows in marketing, but I think in pursuit of outcomes for the whole firm. How can we be a catalyst at embedding this kind of new exciting innovation? I think there's still a huge responsibility to be visionary and to be creative. And I think, above all, to be accountable. You've got to be able to prove, you've got to be able to demonstrate the impact of your marketing on commercial outcomes. So, I list those because I think it's a really interesting, broad, complex list that encompasses a little bit of being a general manager, your deep understanding of the business, being a marketer in the ways that people traditionally perceive marketers, a little bit of a CTO, a little bit of a CIO, a little bit of an analytics expert. So I think it's a really interesting role. And if I think about how it's evolved in the many years I've been doing this, it's quite incredible. It's probably one of the most evolved roles out there, I think, at a leadership level.
And I'm fascinated by, not only the breadth of, what you're covering there, but also the size of an organization like BlackRock, like Citi. And I'm fascinated to understand, what do you focus on? Because you can't focus on everything. So what are the metrics that you focus on, let's say, a weekly basis, on a quarterly basis? And what are those metrics that really matter?
So, look, the metrics that ultimately matter are the commercial metrics. That's what I care the most about. And I think, if I sort of relay a story of how I accidentally got into marketing at Honda, I was a business development guy many, many years ago. And
you were a sales
meeting,
guy.
I was a sales guy. That's where I started out. I was a sales guy. And I was in a sales meeting. And I was asked, anything you think we could do differently? And I spoke up and I said, I don't think our brand's positioned properly. And I'm not sure our marketing is connecting with the right segments of the buying population for us to achieve the goals we have. The next day, I was basically given the job of running marketing at Honda, literally, no joke, less than 24 hours later. And I always sort of say today, I became a sort of marketer by accident rather than by design. But I think, to answer your question, what I loved were two things. One, very quickly, the ability to influence perception and behavior at scale. I found that very exciting, particularly as a sales guy. I'd only done that one-on-one, which seemed like the really hard way to do things. But when I started to see the impact of the changes that we were making on the business results, I was a buyer. So, we tripled market share in just under 3.5 years through better brand positioning, better marketing, as well as, better products, better pricing, etc. But I think, that for me is the metric that really matters. I think there are a lot of other metrics, though, that you need to look at as a marketer, and a lot of them are sort of what I would call the diagnostic type measures. That's what you're using almost hour by hour, minute by minute now to be able to actually optimize what you're doing in market in terms of what you're saying and where you're placing and who you're actually reaching. So I think, you've got this sort of really complex spectrum of metrics that you look at, but honestly, the ones that matter the most are the commercial outcomes. And those are the ones that our business partners care about. They don't really care if 1 million people have seen a video or 1,000 people have opened an email. They care about, great, well, what's that done in terms of perception and ultimately behavior and desire to buy my product?
So the second part of my question was, what makes a great CMO? So beyond just focusing on the business metrics and driving genuine outcomes, anything else come to mind?
Look, I think I talked through the capabilities. I think you've got to be a CMO who has a broad and deep understanding of the business. You've got to understand the customer. The customer has to be at the center of everything you're doing. There is the need now to be an expert in the data and the technology, and I think that just gets more and more complex as we have more and more data and honestly more and more technology to be able to actually get the power out of that data. There is that need to be innovative. There is that need to be creative. There's a need to understand brands and reputation. And I think what's interesting, those two are connected, but they're quite distinct. You've got brands in support of the customer and making sure the customer believes in you and trusts you, and has an affinity for your product. Reputation goes much broader. It's the many other stakeholders that can influence the landscape in which you're operating. And I think, my time at BlackRock taught me that, in some of the reputational work we had to do, after some of the political attacks we got, focusing on sustainability. So I think, reputation is a really important part now of a CMO, and you have to be accountable. So I think those are the kind of core capabilities. But I think there are some really critical behaviors, some of which I've already mentioned. I think, you've got to be visionary and you've got to be inspirational in your leadership, not just for your team, but I also think for the community of partners and colleagues across the firm. Good CMOs can rally a business in what they're doing. And I think, I've seen that at some of the great companies I've worked at and some of the great CMOs that I worked for as I went through my career. I think you need to be curious, and you need to be brave enough to act on that curiosity. So you've got to be a little bit of a risk taker. Not everything works. And I think in a world where the landscape and the environment you're operating in is changing, there are going to be things outside of your control. And there are going to be new things like Gen AI, where you have a hunch that something's going to be a good idea, but you'll do it, it may not be. But that sort of failure is a step towards ultimately being able to implement something new, and get the success out of that. I think in a dynamic environment, you've got to be agile. You've got to be versatile, and I think most of all nowadays you've probably got to be resilient. But I think that's a behavior that I think a lot of leaders have to share in the world we work in today.
That's a lot. There's a lot.
It is. It's a complex role.
So give me an example of when you say, is there an example in your career where you've managed to rally the entire business around a visionary message, a visionary point of view? Do you have an example of that? And if you can share a bit of like how you got to that, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the sort of most recent example of that is the iShares brand. I was brought into BlackRock from Visa at a very interesting time. iShares was a fairly recent acquisition that BlackRock had made as part of Barclays Global Investors. The ETF industry was starting to get more competitive, I think now about how many players there are now can stretch into the multiple tens compared to the sort of less than 10 that were in existence when I first took over. And I think therefore, there was a real need to reimagine the brand and to reimagine our marketing approach and go from being, more of a sales enablement function to being a true strategic marketing function. And I think, we went on a journey together. It wasn't just me. And I think that's something that I've learned as a CMO. You don't do this autonomously and in a silo. You've got to bring other leaders with you, and you've got to bring your team with you, and you've got to bring partners across the firm with you. So I think, if I relay a little bit of the journey we went on at iShares, it started with deeply understanding the business. Where are the growth opportunities? In terms of who, but also what products. And I think, in a changing landscape, that can evolve pretty quickly. So, we narrowed down on a younger audience that we felt was really where the growth was going to come from, which is important as you start to think about how you want to reimagine your brand and how you want to reimagine your marketing. Understanding that customer and their evolving behavior was really, really critical. Who are they? How do they make their decisions? What kind of content are they consuming? How much of that is branded?
How does a really, that's a fascinating example because so many institutions have dropped the ball when it tries to connect with these modern investors, especially some at the scale of BlackRock and iShares. So let's hone in a little bit on that research you were doing with this younger millennial audience. How did you get that insight and know that you could trust it?
Honestly, you do some desk research. I think, there's a, just sitting there and being smart and looking at the rise of people like the Finfluencer, which I still find hard to say, but the young financial influencer, that audience, millennials and Gen Zs, they listen to their peers. Their peers were rising and being very vocal, and actually being incredibly informed. So you're starting to see a very different way of decision making. You then do a lot of research. I mean, you can do research with your agency partners, particularly on the media side, to understand where these audiences are spending their time. No surprise, it's not the traditional places anymore, which again forces you to start to think a little differently about where your brand's going to show up and how you're going to show up and what your message is. And then there was a lot of research that we actually did with the millennial investor, those that are investing, but also importantly, those that weren't investing, and understanding why they were not. and what would actually bring them into the world of investing. And I think, we started to hear lots of interesting things along the lines of, I just don't think it's, brands are not brands. The traditional brands in investing are not brands for me. They don't feel approachable. They don't feel accessible. How they speak to me seems to be in more, investment speak than real language. The imagery that I'm seeing is a sort of sea of sameness of sort of happy retirees running on beaches or, sailing in yachts. That's not why I'm investing. And I think when you start to get some of those insights back, it really starts to force you to think very differently about, what your brand actually stands for, but importantly, how you actually go to market. So I think, there's you can't beat the research and the insights that you can gather. I think what's great now, you've got a lot of those insights already. The data can be incredibly revealing, but going out and still talking and interviewing people was where you really start to get to those human truths that you can really start to activate around.
And what are you looking for? Like, how do you know when you've landed on an insight? Because, everything that you're saying just resonates so strongly with what we've seen in the community that we've built here at Finimize. Over 90% of our audience consult a friend or peer before they make any investment decision, which is polar opposite to anything in the past. I find that fascinating. But what do you look for when you're combing through insights to say, okay, this is interesting. This really sticks out. And this is something that we should bet the iShares brand on?
I think it's something that makes you go, wow. It's something that really stands out as different and challenges, I guess, what you perceive to be the industry norms. Makes you challenge what you see others doing, makes you challenge what you're doing yourself, and probably makes you feel, it's where you need to be curious and courageous. It probably makes you feel a little scared. It's like, wow, we've got to go in a really different direction here. And, as a marketer and as a marketing team, we intuitively know it's the right thing to do. But as I said earlier, you don't act autonomously. How do I actually start to educate my peers, the leaders around me, to believe that this different direction is the right direction to go in? So when you feel a little bit of that discomfort and you feel a little bit like, wow, this feels like a really powerful insight, you genuinely know you're onto something pretty cool. I think if it feels obvious or expected, it's probably not that insightful. It's just confirming what you probably already knew in your gut. So I think, those would be the sort of ways that I identify those kind of truly exciting insights.
Totally. And it's something that keeps coming up. I've managed to speak to some of the best marketers in financial services recently, and it's amazing how much of that sort of gut instinct of looking for the uncomfortableness, looking for something that resonates internally with you as well as a buyer, that can differentiate the great and excellent marketers from the good marketers. So let's just sort of follow this process along. So you've established the insight with a new audience. You believe in it, and then you talked about getting buy-in from the rest of, I imagine, your leadership team and then the company. How did you do that?
Well, one, you need to have the relationships in place to be able to do that. I think, spending the time when you get into any new role, which is what I'm doing now in my new role at Citi, I'm getting to know people. I'm getting to know them. They're getting to know me. I'm building my credibility, building my network, which I think then gives you the permission to go back to them at some point and say, look, we've got this incredible insight. This is what we want to activate around. And I think, more often than not, if it's coming from a place of robust support, as in data, research, people will genuinely believe it. I think the question, though, which becomes uncomfortable then is, so what does that mean? What are the implications for us? What are we actually going to have to do? And that's when, you need to sort of go, right, if we all align around this insight, now let's go away and figure out what we're actually going to do with it and what this means for us. And I think that's when it becomes real. For people, and starts to make others feel a little uncomfortable, but hopefully a little excited at the same time. So I think, the next steps that we took was, let's understand the brand. And I think there were a number of things we did. One was interrogate the brand and interrogate its history. I'm a big believer that, a brand has a DNA at its core. There's a reason why it was created in the very first place, whether that was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or 200 years ago in the case of Citi. And that still holds true for why the brand exists and the role it has with the consumer. You need to understand that, because often what happens over a lifetime, brands acquire a lot of things that sometimes add value, sometimes are a little superfluous. You need to strip all that back and get to the sort of the real core of what was behind the creation of the brand in the first place. I think there's then understanding your audience and the brands that they engage, and what are the attributes or the characteristics of brands that they engage with, and what implications does it have for the brand that we're managing? What do we need to acquire? How do we need to represent ourselves a little differently to make sure that we can resonate, we can break through, we can feel accessible and approachable? So I think there was a lot of work done around that. There was then work we did with employees. Employees are always a great source of insight into your brand. Especially those outside of marketing, to be totally honest. They're dealing with the brand every day. In many cases, they're in front of the clients every day. They're getting a good set of feedback on what's working and what's not. So I think, you can get some good insights from there. And I think, that led us to this sort of positioning of being a champion of investor progress, which is where we ended up for iShares. iShares was always focused on progress. That was where it was when it was created within the Wells Fargo business. It was there to disrupt what were perceived to be, underperforming and inefficient mutual funds. That was where the ETF construct came from in the 60s. So I think, that still held true. The focus on the investor and doing it in the pursuit of better outcomes for an investor was absolutely true as well. Hence the champion of investor progress. And we actually had a sort of like subline around relentlessly pursuing new ways to invest, which was really the disruptive nature of the brand. And I think what was exciting about that is it sort of started to articulate behavior that employees could start to gather around and get motivated around and ask themselves, what are they doing? How are they evolving their role in support of the brand? And how are they relentlessly pursuing better ways to invest, whether that be products or distribution, intermediary relationships, things of that nature. So I think, that ability to really get to what the brand is and how the brand behaves is essential. There was an understanding of the competitive landscape, which I think is important. But I think, the thing that we were looking at was we want to stand out from the competitive landscape. We don't want to be like the competitor.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because again, in the Finimize community, we have over 1 million community members. We know them inside out. And I think it was over a 2-year period, maybe an 18-month period, where the iShares brand just started rocketing versus all other ETF providers. And one thing that did that was the language around how you describe the ETFs. Was that, I don't know whether that was an output from this brand, but every other brand would still use ridiculous acronyms to explain what was in the product. And that's so easy to do. So I guess my question was, how did you defend against the brand coming out of that being, well, people buy from us because we're massive and we're really old, which is what most other asset managers. I was talking to Hannah Grove last week, the State Street CMO. She said exactly the same thing. Every single financial institution comes back to being, we're massive and we're really old. How did you defend against that?
By basically the insights, which were, I don't think the millennial investor and the emerging Gen Z investor cares about you being massive and old. They care about you having a product and having a brand that they can trust in and that resonates with them, the ways they like to invest, and the ways that they actually want to invest. So what I mean by that is not just the exposures they're getting, but the convenience of investment. Don't make it hard for me to do. And I think, what was smart at iShares, and to be fair, this was happening before I had walked in, was some of the intermediary relationships that we were building, which was really focused on people being able to access ETFs in a self-directed, convenient, and easy way. I go on a brokerage platform. I go on a Acorn site. Make it meet the client where the client is. Don't force them to come to you. And I think, that was something that was already happening. But I think, what we did as we were thinking about the brand relaunch was we started to think not just about the intermediary relationships, but the experience that the investor was going to have when they went from a great piece of communication from iShares, and then how are we going to connect them through to the Fidelity brokerage platform or to an Acorn? So there was a lot of work that we actually did together with their marketing teams to make sure that we were thinking about that experience and making sure it was seamless. And I think that's something that resonates as well. If you're forcing...
No, you go.
No, I was going to say, I think if you're forcing a younger investor to change behavior to the past, you're never going to win them as a customer. You're just not. And I think, there's a lot of disruption happening in all of our lives right now. And I think we had to embrace that same level of disruption and really think about the experience and think about what you could do on a phone. That's really what it came down to.
And we found, exactly the same thing specifically with content, right? Every financial brand would speak down to the audience because the message was, well, we're smart, you're dumb. If you want to start investing, before you start investing, read all of this on compound interest and diversification. Meanwhile, all of this audience they're trying to acquire are, down the pub talking about Tesla, talking about AI, talking about all the things that they're excited about, and renewable energy. And I think iShares did a fantastic job. So it's amazing to hear how you managed to really get to the customer insight, then get the internal belief, then position a brand. But what's even more, I guess, interesting to our audience is to turn those into revenue, into assets, which we were very successful at. So let's talk a bit about that. So once you have the brand, the positioning, the plan, how did you distribute that product so well? And how did that drive net new assets?
So I think, look, the distribution network was arguably already there. We had great network community of advisors around the world. We had some great brokerage platforms, some emerging platforms like Acorns that were important partners. I think, what marketing was doing was getting the brand noticed and getting people to engage with the brand and making sure that experience was seamless. But I think, one of the things that I've learned in my career is, marketing is great. It can be very inspiring. But if you don't have the right products, you don't have them priced correctly, you don't have the right distribution and the best experience with those distributors, it's all for nothing. And I think, one of the things that we did a really good job of, and I mentioned it a second ago, was that internal launch. We spent several months with the brand internally before we even took it into market. And that was our opportunity to kind of go, right, what do we need to do to be able to deliver in a consistent way against this new brand positioning? And that's not just what we say or how we speak or the exciting pieces of content we're creating. It's making sure we've got the right products, the right exposures. We're making sure they're available in the right places, that they're priced competitively, that we're packaging them in interesting ways with partners like Acorn. So I think there was a huge amount of effort that went on outside of the marketing function, obviously with the marketing team as a steward, I guess as a catalyst, but really the assets flowed because everything else lined up. And I think, that's the power of a great executive team that I was a part of, who were able to get as excited as I was about the brand, see the potential the brand had within their own areas and how it could be a catalyst, not just to inspire and motivate people, but to actually drive real innovation and come to market with some really interesting new products in really interesting new ways. When everything lines up, great things happen. That's what happened at HP. I think you mentioned that in the intro, everything lined up. So I think, that's a big learning of mine. So, I could do a great brand launch, but if you haven't got everything else lined up, it'll be fun, but it's probably not going to drive the business results or at least the size of business results that you would like.
It sounds like the secret to CMO success is easy. You just find a great company.
Great colleagues.
Great colleagues.
You need great colleagues.
Well, I remember when we were speaking a few weeks back, you said that your time at Visa really taught you how to get a partnership right, and arguably that was the differentiator here in the iShares campaign. Those real key partnerships. You mentioned Acorns, but I can think of pretty much every fintech platform that our retail investors use ended up launching some kind of partnership. Can you talk us through a little bit of the key tips to running a successful partnership?
Honestly, it's all about empathy. I think, my time at Visa, which, as everybody knows, is a payment network. It's not the product. The payment product is issued by the bank. It's accepted by a merchant who has a bank that sits behind them. So without that network of partners, the product, you can't go to Visa and get the product or experience the product. So I think, my time there made me appreciate the power of the network. And I think when you started to think about it as a marketer and how you were going to drive, greater business success, you realize you can't do it on your own. You've got to inspire the network of partners to help you. And I think being empathetic and understanding what matters to them, what they're trying to achieve, and starting to find those areas where what Visa was trying to achieve could actually overlap with what a issuing bank or an acquiring bank or a merchant wants to achieve, is where we used to focus our time and effort. Sometimes that was an easy conversation. Sometimes it was a little harder, particularly in some of the emerging markets I've worked with, where there was sort of skepticism around electronic payments and the ability to sort of track spend and not pay for things in cash. You're like, why would I want to do that? So, there was some, again, it's that sort of curiosity. Ask a lot of questions, really mine for that space where you truly are in their shoes and you understand where the partner's coming from, and then go away and really think about what is it that we can do that's going to be aligned with that and help them be successful with their goal, because that's where you're going to get the commitment and the partnership that's going to be powerful. And I think, my Visa life was exactly that. It served me incredibly well when I went to HP, which is very similar, incredibly well at BlackRock. So I think, it's an important thing to learn early in a career, but it does take work and it takes time. And I think that empathy piece, as well as building a relationship, allows you to really find that sweet spot where you understand what you've got to do to be able to drive value for the partner and in turn value for yourself.
I love that empathy comes into a successful relationship, because so many people try and rip each other's eyes out on both sides of the bargain and then wonder why it didn't work.
Yeah, funny that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to come back to this question. So I joked about how it's easy to have a successful career as a CMO. It does help being a good company, but I've spoke to some of the colleagues that you've worked with in the past to do a little bit of background research on you. One of the questions that they sort of wanted me to ask you was your experience boomeranging. So in your career, you were at Visa, you left to join Xerox, then you went back to Visa. You were at BlackRock as a managing director. You left to go to Hewlett Packard, then you went back to BlackRock. It seems to be the secret to getting promoted and being successful, cynically. But you must be learning things from getting outside of finance and then jumping back in, because many finance CMOs have just been at the same company for 20 years. That's how they sort of rise their way up. They get a really good understanding of that business. Everyone in the business trusts them. But you don't do that. So I'd love to know a little bit about whether that was on purpose, why you do that, and kind of what you learned along the way.
So sounds like I have a very messy career. So no, look, I mean, everything happens for a reason. So I would quickly add that. But I think one of the things that I think has been a motivator for me is wanting to have experiences in my career. When I was in automotive, which is where I started out as a sales guy, I realized very quickly I didn't want to become the car guy. I wanted to actually, be able to experience different industries. And therefore, I went agency side for a few years, which gave me the opportunity to diversify my industry experience. And I'm glad I did. That was where I actually started to engage with financial services in the UK. And I think if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have ended up at Visa, and my career would have been very different. So I think, I realized early on that was something that motivated me. I also realized early on that marketing is a very transferable discipline. As long as you are willing to do the hard work when you end up in a new industry, to learn the business and to understand the clients. So I think if you enjoy doing the hard work of understanding a business and understanding the clients, then you can move between pretty much any industry with marketing as a discipline, and be able to continue to build your career. I think, some of the things that I've taken away from that experience are the learnings I've had in certain industries that I've then been able to transfer when I've gone to a different industry. So, we talked a little bit just then about Visa and partnerships and how important that was. That served me incredibly well at HP, incredibly well at BlackRock. Every business pretty much, unless they're direct to consumer, has an intermediary type model. That ability to understand intermediaries and how to build meaningful partnerships and to be able to co-market together has served me incredibly well. There are other things that I think I've learned from moving industries, because some industries that are a different level of maturity from a marketing perspective. Going and working at HP in technology, they were embracing account-based marketing. While I was there, it was something we brought to the firm. I saw the incredible impact that account-based marketing can have in terms of institutional marketing. I was able to bring that to BlackRock, now looking to bring it to Citi. So I think, you get exposure to different things that you might not get exposed to if you just stayed in the same industry. That generally, is pretty much along the same levels of maturity. So I think, those kind of experiences have served me incredibly well, and I think have made me a much more rounded marketer than I might have been had I just stayed in one industry. I think the other thing I've loved as well is it's forced me to ask questions. If you move around industries, you can't assume anything, and you realize very quickly there's a lot you have to learn. And it's forced me to ask a lot of questions about the business, about client segments, that at the same time has been a real sort of catalyst for me to have an interesting sort of aha moment or insight around how we're marketing and what we could do a little differently. So I've liked that tension that it's created for me. And then I think last but not least, I've taken a lot of great things away in terms of a fantastic network of colleagues, a diverse range of mentors. I've worked for a diverse range of managers, all of whom I've learned from. And I'd like to think, that sort of different industry experience means you get in front of very different people, and you're learning from them and making you the whole person that you are. And I think if I just stayed in one industry, I'm not completely sure I would be who I am today. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But it comes with hard work. But I like that.
Any mentors that stick out to you, or a specific lesson from one of the great mentors throughout your career?
One of my he's probably my biggest mentor, Antonio Lucio, who I had the privilege of working with when I was at Visa, when he was actually the CMO, the global CMO of Visa. An incredible mentor. And I think, yes, I learned a lot from him about marketing, but I think what I learned from him most of all was about leadership, and the importance of leadership, and how leadership is so much more than being really good at your discipline and being able to lead in your discipline. And I worked with him at HP, and we stayed in touch ever since. And if ever I'm having a career inflection moment, or I am about to do something that I haven't done before, Antonio is more often than not my first call, and always has incredible words of wisdom. And anyone who has had the privilege of spending time with him knows he's a great human being, but also an impressive leader and incredibly wise. So he's a really, really good example of someone that I met a long time ago and have kept in.
Yeah, I've also noticed that mentors are almost, when you really dig into CMOs taking on new opportunities, mentors are the sort of unsung hero, because you jump up from VP to CMO, from regional to global. How are you going to build that new experience? So I think it's great to hear that mentors for you are something that has been very powerful. But again, speaking to your previous colleagues, they all cited the fact that you were a fantastic mentor at scale. So some of these people on your team, I won't mention their names now, but I'll send you their names afterwards.
Okay.
They mentioned how loved you were, how cool and collected you were when navigating different cycles, how amazing you were at nurturing talent, especially seeing a significant number of people rise to managing director that were underneath you. I'd love to know how you do this, and especially considering the scale of some of the teams that you run.
Wow, it's wonderful to hear that. So didn't think I was loved. So that's amazing. So look, I think it's for me it's important. At the end of the day, we're working with each other as human beings, and I think as a leader, yes, you need to bring expertise in a discipline. You do need to bring expertise in a leadership, but I really believe you need to do that in an incredibly human way. And I think, we've already mentioned the empathy piece in terms of partnership. It absolutely holds true in terms of how you lead a team. So I think, I've always put a real focus on getting to know the team, communicating with the team both ways, not just me to them, but enabling them to communicate with me. And I used to do a lot of either one-to-ones or ask me anythings, whether I was in the US or traveling around the world, which allowed me to engage with every level of the team. And, I think through that, you learn a huge amount from each other. And you really get to know each other at a level that I think truly matters. And I think, the other piece I would add, I've always been sort of very focused on why do I do this? I love what I do and I get paid for it, but there's got to be a bigger purpose for why you're actually getting up every morning and doing the roles that we do. And I spent a lot of time probably about 20 years ago, really asking myself, what is it as a manager that got me out of bed in the morning and got me excited to go to work. And I ended up sort of defining my purpose as wanting to create an environment where people can grow, do their very best work, and achieve ambitious goals whilst being respected, recognized, and valued. And I think, a lot of that came out of sort of real reflection on what actually matters to me as a human being. And it's sort of interesting as I started to get brave enough to socialize that with others. It was amazing how it resonated. And it sort of gave me real belief that if I were to stay focused on that why, I would create an environment where everybody could rise. They can do great work, they can grow, they can build their fantastic careers. We together can do things that, like reimagine an iShares brand that you might not think would be possible. But equally do it in an environment where you do feel highly respected, highly valued, and importantly recognized as an individual. And I think when you create that environment, something very special happens. And I think, I've had a few times in my career where I've either been a part of that because of another leader, but it's a joy to hear you say that was the environment I created at BlackRock, because it sort of validates what I hoped was true, and what I hoped was the right thing to be driving me, and that it does actually make a difference. And the team at BlackRock were phenomenal. I mean, they are phenomenal. I mean, it was one of the happiest times of my career there, and I got to work with wonderful people, and we did incredible things. And as you've already said, we had amazing success. And I think that environment that we were able to create together under my leadership enabled that to happen. So it's great to hear that.
It's amazing. And, I will reveal and say thanks to Tanya Kachana and Tim Broad as two of the people that I was speaking to, who are very, awesome. Very, very positive about working under your leadership. So I think that I want to finish on some of your advice, but before we do, I'd like for you to sort of reflect on your own career. What is your proudest moment as a marketer? That maybe there's a time where you really got it right. I was rewatching the iShares Future Ballers campaign, and that was so powerful, so well timed. But are there any campaigns that you think were particularly transformative that you're very proud of?
iShares Ballers definitely one. I mean, I think that was a continuation of the sort of disruptive marketing that the iShares team were doing, and really thinking about the consumer and deeply understanding them, and leaning into an idea that was anchored in an insight. And
what was that
really
insight?
Resonated. So the insight was, if you sort of connect the insight that this younger investor was really looking to peers and influencers for advice rather than the brand alone. And then we ended up doing some really interesting work with the MBA, and there was this incredible insight that popped up that 5 years after retirement, 80% of professional athletes in the US are bankrupt. And it's not because they haven't made a lot of money. They have. They often just haven't invested that money incredibly wisely. They've either invested in some of the wrong things, or they've invested in some get rich schemes that haven't helped them get rich. And I think, as we were talking with the MBA, it was like, wow, couldn't we use sort of draft pick MBA athletes to actually start to be advocates for being smart with what you do with your first paycheck, which is something we all relate to, because all of us at some point in our careers have a first paycheck. Now, yes, I admit a draft MBA player has probably got a slightly larger paycheck than I had when I first stepped into the workforce. But the same question holds true in terms of what do I do with it? And I think, we ended up with this incredible roster of draft MBA players. An incredible financial influencer who was a lady who had also already worked on Wall Street, so was incredibly knowledgeable about financial products and the world of investing. And we put them together, and they were at that stage in their career, and I think had the right mentality of like, look, I need to put a percentage of my first paycheck away. I need to start building that nest egg for when I do retire, whether that's in 5 years' time or 15 years' time, depending on how my career goes. But, I'm going to be earning a lot of money, hopefully, over my career. And if I start that behavior now, it'll serve me and invariably my family well. So those were the great insights that we were able to activate around. And they were an amazing group of people. We built a ton of fantastic content, all just phenomenal in terms of authenticity, highly engaging across multiple platforms, and was incredibly successful, to the point where, we were getting other leagues in not just in the US, but in the world, actually calling up and saying, hey, we would love to do a similar financial education program with our sort of early stage players. So we did actually end up having sort of preliminary discussions with some of the big soccer teams in the UK, or football teams. You see, I've been in the US too long saying soccer. Football teams in the UK, which I think is really, that's the sort of the recognition you want to have of a campaign. It worked incredibly well for us as a brand and as a business, but I think it also motivated a lot of other people to go, this is a real need. This is an insight that plays true wherever you are in sport. How do we actually start to blow this out? So that was definitely a campaign I was incredibly proud of. There have been so many. I've had a phenomenal career when I get a moment like this to stop and reflect on it. And I think, what I've always found is the campaigns that make me feel proud are the ones where you've really been innovative and creative and disruptive, and it's driven something really powerful in terms of commercial outcome. There was a great campaign we did at Visa activating the NFL, which was called Make It Epic. And I think, we really challenged ourselves to say, right, it's great we're a sponsor of the NFL, and Visa has a lot of great sponsorship properties, but how are we adding value to the fans of the NFL? What could we do as a sponsor that really makes the fan experience epic? And we ended up doing this incredible campaign that gave Visa cardholders the opportunity to experience the NFL like no one else could. So be in the locker room for a speech with a coach before a game, get an opportunity to actually be at a press conference and interview the coach or the players, and loads of other what I would call sort of like money can't buy experiences. Yeah. And I think in a world where, thankfully we are more and more craving new experiences, something like that resonated incredibly well. And of course, it was one of those kind of campaigns that, took off in social media. It took off in our earned coverage because it was just like groundbreaking. This is just great. A sponsor actually thinking about how they can add value to the fan experience rather than just, putting their brand on a property and taking the sort of the equity from the brand. And, it really sort of set a platform for what we did in subsequent years. So I think, those are the campaigns that I have a lot of great memories and great memories of and feel very proud of. There were the times when. Sorry, go on, Max.
No, go. You can go.
No, I was going to say as well. It's it's great when you're doing that, because the excitement and the inspiration and energy that you have in a team when you're trying to pull off something you've never done before or you've never seen done in your industry. And it feels really hard, but when you get there and you get to launching it and you get the accolades and the success, there's nothing better. And I think, it goes a little bit back in a circular way to one of the earlier questions about, the team and that advocacy. You create an environment where those magical things can happen. You're giving people the permission to do the great things that they want to do. And it's massively rewarding on so many levels.
What I would love to finish on is some advice from you, Alex, to an aspiring CMO. And if you could give them one piece of advice that you think really would be a game changer, potentially think about the moments in your career where you've stepped up to global CMO. What would that advice be?
I'll have two pieces. I think one is take ownership of your career and be clear where you want to go. There's only one person in the world who cares about your career as much as you do, and that's you. And I think I often sit with folks and teams, and they're kind of like, what's the company doing for me, or what are you doing for me? Which is fair questions to ask, but it should always start with, what are you doing for yourself? And do you have clarity in terms of where you want to go? And I would say my bit of advice that I would ask people to take forward is, don't be afraid to throw out there a big, bold role that you want to do one day, even if it does feel slightly out of reach. Because if you never say it, you never put it out there, the chances are you'll never get there. If you put it out there, there is a chance that you're going to make it happen. So I think be big and bold and be willing to state publicly what your career ambitions are. The second bit of advice is something that I've always, along with my purpose, had in my back pocket at every stage in my career, which is literally 4 words: be courageous, be curious, be collaborative, and be kind. I think if you do those 4 things, you're probably going to end up doing your job pretty well, and you're probably going to end up building a fantastic network of people who will be hopefully there to support you, and you're doing the difficult things. They'll be there rallying around you when you've been successful. So I think being curious, being courageous, being collaborative, and being kind will stand everyone in good stead going forwards.
That's fantastic. And, I still can't believe that you can just reel off your purpose, even though it was written all of those years ago. It kind of shows that it works, and it shows that it means something, and you have your own brand.
I don't think the week goes by when I don't think about my purpose. And honestly, sort of letting you into a secret, there are times when I will filter something I'm about to do against my purpose. So I use it a little bit as a sort of personal strategy. If I'm going to go and do this, is this going to actually support, what I genuinely believe in? And if it's not, maybe I shouldn't do it. So it's an incredibly powerful set of words for me.
Well, I'm looking forward to everyone that's listened to this going away and thinking a bit more strongly about empathy, because I think that seems to be rooted in everything that you do, from your commercial partnerships to the way that you lead teams to the campaigns you come up with, and even to how you think about your own personal values. But it's been a real pleasure. And I mean what I said at the start, on paper, Alex, you're one of the best that are out there right now.
Thank you, Max.
But genuinely, thank you for taking the time for me and for our listeners, and good luck with Citi.
Thank you. No, look, this has been great. Thank you so much. It's very exciting to get invited to do a podcast with you. So I really appreciate the invitation, and it's been a lot of fun. And I'll let you know how it's going at Citi.
Yeah, we'll be watching with much admiration and support. Okay, thank you,
Awesome.
Alex.
Thanks a lot. Take care, Max. Bye.